Hey, John, how are you doing today?
Sachin, I'm great. Great to see you, and thank you so much for having me on this awesome podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited because I've gotten to know you over the last year or so, and I've known of you for many, many years for all the amazing work that you're doing here in the Toronto area. As a naturopath, you've innovated, you've explored the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare, and you've helped thousands and thousands of people. And I know that's your mission to continue doing that. So I'm thrilled to learn from you. I'm thrilled to share what knowledge you've acquired over the years. And I'm also excited to see what the future has in store for you as well. I'm curious as a entrepreneur and as a naturopath, as a physician, as a family man, as a husband and a father, what really drives and inspires you about the future?
Yeah, this is a great question, but I want to start off by thanking you. This is an awesome platform. I know what you do and all the people you've been helping. So this is an honor to be linking arms with you today and sharing, our knowledge together and trying to help more and more people. But yeah, great question. Where do I see medicine right now? Where do I see it going? I mean, it's a big field. It's an emerging field. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And and I think I've been in practice for almost 20 years now. I think this is my heading into my 19th year. So a lot's changed in that time frame. When I started my pre-med degree, email had literally just come on the scene, and I was like, we don't need that. We can just call somebody. So think of what's gone on with the advent of email and the internet. I am very passionate about bridging technology and science and really logical care, bringing them all together. And this is what, ultimately led me into naturopathic medicine, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But we're at a real interesting time in healthcare right now. We've never had more all-time rates of disease, whether it's autoimmune or cardiometabolic, or cancer or neurodegenerative disease. We're in trouble right now, and obviously, the current system right now is doing its absolute best, but we're falling behind, and we have to find ways to get ahead of that. And I know we're going to unpack that today.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to first learn about what inspired you to become a practitioner. You and I have both been in practice for almost 20 years now, and my have times changed, and have people evolved, and challenges evolved, and I still feel like we're behind the times as a system as a whole. And I know everyone's doing their best, and sometimes it takes a while for these big behemoths to change the way they do things. And I think some of our people listening might know this, but it takes about 17 years for any innovation to make it into the marketplace. So, we graduated about 19 years ago, and now we're at that point where some of the things that we were probably thinking were cutting edge and bleeding edge are now starting to make it into the mainstream. So, unpack for me what got you excited about going into natural healthcare and specifically naturopathic medicine.
Yeah, I grew up in a very small town, Northern Ontario-ish, and very traditional town and a very traditional family. Three generations of dentists, all we did was just, if we had a problem, we'd go to our regular doctor. And I'm the oldest of four kids. And about the time I was about 12 years old, my only two uncles were, at that time really sick. One on my mom's side, one on my dad's side, and they were close in age, and they had two very different but very serious diseases, and they were going to their doctors and they were getting their prescriptions, and they both died within a year of each other. And I remember looking at my dad, and of course, my parents are heartbroken, and grandparents, and everyone's going through the grieving process. And I remember looking at my dad, being kind of 11 and 12, and saying, "Dad, how come the medicine didn't work?" And it wasn't that the medicine didn't work, but that in my mind, I was like, well, they were taking their medicine. What happened? And of course, my parents didn't have an answer for that. But what was interesting is at that moment, being in a small town, this is why it's relevant. Suddenly, we were that weird family that started drinking carrot juice before dinner and having a shot of cod liver oil before breakfast. And of course, do you think kids want to do that? No, no, that was not cool in the house. And we were all doing great with school and academics and athletics, but my parents said, "Look, you can't go to school unless you do your shot of cod liver oil in the morning." And I love school, but I'd be like, "Oh, fine," and then knock it down. And it was awful at the time. It's obviously gotten a lot better now. But the point is that they realized that my uncles had some dietary and some lifestyle habits that weren't serving them. And of
Mm,
course, it's much more than that, but that's what they could see on the surface. And they started to unpack that. And they realized that, hey, we're not going to let this, if anything we can do about it, we're not going to let this happen to our kids. So they started changing their diet and they started changing their lifestyle. And it's not that they were abusing their bodies in any way, but they really became passionate about nutrition. And to me at the time, I thought, oh, I could hardly wait to go to grandma's house where I could have a pop. But it's like you now look, and I remember growing up, I remember the thing that dawned on me was when I went into high school and ultimately into university, I was still heading to become a Western doctor. That was my path. That's what I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to be in medicine. I knew nothing about naturopathic medicine, let alone functional medicine. But as I got into my pre-med degree and my biological sciences degree, all of my electives I started grabbing were clinical nutrition and herbal medicine and all these other different electives, which are interesting because I saw my parents thriving. I saw my siblings thriving. I saw my grandparents who are still alive doing very well, even though one side of the family adopted the nutritional part of it more than the other side. It started to stick with me and it started to make sense. And I still had all the passion in the world for Western medicine. And it was just about answering the question why, as opposed to, well, here, let's just treat the symptom. Maybe there's something going on behind the scenes. And the other big part of this that was an influence for me, Sachin, beyond my parents, was my grandfather, my mom's dad, survivor of the war in camps and all this, terrible things. And he was an engineer and it was very analytical. And he, at the age of 60, had double massive arthritis in his hips. And his doctors at the time said, you need to be thinking about getting a double hip replacement. And he was extremely active, very high playing tennis player. And he said, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And he hit the books and he changed his diet and he started taking his own herbal supplements and some, simple supplements beyond omega-3s and so forth. And his arthritis went away. And I laugh and I smile because if you knew Jeju's, what I called him, if you knew him, he was so humble and analytical, but he was brought in front of his doctors at the rounds. They did a rounds about him. They brought all the doctors in because he
hmm.
didn't. Here's this guy that they thought for sure was a layup for double hip replacement, and suddenly he's running around playing tennis till the age of 88, and he survived until he was 95. We lost him 2 years ago, but he was my biggest advocate, aside with my parents, to go into naturopathic medicine.
Wow, what a great story. And my condolences and may he rest in peace. It's amazing that when we have people in our lives that are role modeling what's possible to us. I was having a conversation with my son this morning. He wanted to listen to music on the way into school, and I wanted to listen to an audiobook. And you can only imagine with a teenager the indifferences there. And I'm like, you know what? One day you'll thank me, and I hope I'm alive for when that day happens. And so it's great to have people that are showcasing and modeling for us. What may some people thought was impossible, right? I mean, if he's being called in front of the grand rounds and and doing things that even the medical system at that time didn't think was possible. And shout out to your parents because I know cod liver oil probably didn't taste as good as it does today, right? They've added all kinds of flavoring systems and everything to it, so it's more palatable and comes in capsules and things like that. But I can only imagine how difficult it was for them to get you to consume it, and they, stood their ground, which is awesome.
They really did. And to this day, there's not a shred of junk food in my parents' house. And I literally, just got off skiing with my dad, who's, 76 today, and he's still out there while I'm in here right now. And so it's really nice to watch, why this stuff actually works. And, it's obviously way more complicated than just nutrition, but nutrition sets the floor, it sets the foundation. And then there's so many
Mm-hmm.
tendrils and avenues that we need as primary caregivers and healthcare providers to really explore with our patients to give them the best of everything.
I love that. Now, in your practice, you've taken a special interest in helping people with digestive issues, and they're growing. It's become a much bigger problem. I can only imagine the food supply has something to do with it. People's stress and anxiety levels have something to do with it. The poisons in our environment have something to do with it. What made you decide to go down that path? Because as a naturopath and as a functional medicine practitioner, sky's the limit. There's so many different conditions and ailments that we can serve and be helpful for. But why specifically digestive disorders for you?
It wasn't anything that I had to go through, fortunately. But what I experienced was there's a couple real key fundamental pieces here that really got my attention with the power of helping people not only fix their gut problems, but setting the stage for healing in other areas. And we'll get into that. But when I was doing my pre-med, one of my assignments for one of the elective courses that I took in nutrition was to work with somebody and and document how change of their diet improved their health. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but I selected a friend of mine, one of my closest friends actually to this day. He had a serious case of ulcerative colitis. And again, this is pre-internet, so I'm dating myself a bit, but we hit the books. There's lots of research and resources there in the library available to us at the time. And I made some very simple changes. I took gluten out of his diet. We discussed a couple other food groups, such as dairy and a few other things, and we got him not to necessarily edify cod liver oil, but we got him on omega-3s. And I'm telling you, he has never stopped thanking me because he was able to drastically cut down some of his pretty harsh medicines at the time, but he was able to get his quality of life back and with minimal intervention. And to this day, he's off all of his meds and thriving and doing many things. So that was an eye opener for me. And I was like, well, this is interesting. And, I wasn't heading into gastroenterology or anything at the time, but I just found that a very powerful case. And of course, I became an ND. And within my first week of practice, I'll never forget this. I was an associate at a clinic in Mississauga, not too far from you, Sachin. And in came a patient who was carried by his parents. It was a 16-year-old boy, and he was literally carried, like he couldn't walk. He was gray.
Mm.
He was so weak. And he came in, and his parents couldn't speak very much English, but he brought his two sisters in. So I had this whole room of his family sitting in there, and he was just doing his best to keep his eyes open. And he had an extremely serious case of ulcerative colitis. So, second round of this in my mind, that was quite severe. And it was advancing, and it was affecting his liver and we explained, and he had some labs done that he brought in. And so, you can imagine being not only a first year practitioner, but a first week practitioner. My eyes were like this. I was committed, and I knew that there was something we could do. I knew I didn't know a lot at the time, but I knew I was committed to helping him. And we did that. And I explained to them, I said, look, I'm going to help you as best as I can. And we literally changed everything from his diet and worked his way up. And at that time, again, I was starting to get exposed to some of the functional medicine tools, and we were able to slowly start accessing some labs that hadn't necessarily been run on him to give us some more data, and looking, for example, in his microbiome and understanding how his body was responding to foods and a few other important things. But it's slowly, and it was interesting because I said, okay, I want you to just change your diet, take a couple of these things. I'm going to see you in 2 weeks. The second appointment, he walked in by himself. Now, his parents are still with him. And the third appointment, he said, well, I've had less than 10 bowel movements today. So we're like, okay, great, high-fiving. And then it just started to unfold from there. And then this young man went from being a liver transplant candidate to somebody who, ended up thriving and doing really well. And I'm paraphrasing again, this was over the course. This took time, and this is very important. I explain this to all my patients. We do not offer a quick fix necessarily, although sometimes things can happen really quickly. That's not what, and most of us, I think, as at least recent humans, are accustomed to. We need something to happen fast, right? We need that quick medicine. But we try to educate our patients that true healing response can often take time. And I worked with this young man for over a year, but he was improving right out of the gate. So in the first couple of months, remarkably. And it was just, to this day, I'll hear from his family once in a while, and they were Portuguese, and they would drop food off for me.
Hmm.
And they didn't have much money. And I remember, we could only do whatever we could do. But they were so grateful and so thankful. And it's always stuck with me, that case.
I love that. Many lives, including yours, were changed through that case. So it's cool to see that it still tugs at your heartstrings. I can tell how important that breakthrough was for that child, and I'm sure he wakes up every day, and the parents wake up every day thanking you for helping them and kind of showing them a different way. It's baffling to me that you've been doing this for many years and I've been doing this for many years, but it's still baffling to me that a lot hasn't changed in medicine. There's been a lot of innovation, a lot of research, a lot of new information coming out, but when it comes down to brass tacks and going to see the doctor, not much has really changed. I'm curious as to what your thoughts would be on why that's the case. And I know it for us, and especially for you, it creates an opportunity to really be of service and provide something different than what's out there. But I'm just curious as to why you think that's the case.
That's an interesting question. And I think I'm going to preface the answer with, I am a big believer of integrating both sides of healthcare. It is not an us, being a natural approach versus them being a Western approach.
Mm,
There is extreme benefits to both sides, and I won't get into this, but I'm very passionate about bridging that and bridging these two worlds and creating that communication between these two worlds that were, not so far long ago considered, almost, I wouldn't say enemies, but they weren't getting along in the sandbox so well. And this is a lot has changed in the last 2 decades that I've been in practice, and I really think we're onto something here, bringing it together in a true integrated fashion. But to get back to your question, I think we're starting to, and I think what's stalled a little bit maybe is that we're still trying to treat the symptom. We have to make sure that we're understanding that the symptom is our body trying to tell us something. And it doesn't matter if you're using natural medicine or another form of medicine. If we're just trying to treat the symptom, we're not getting the point. And we have to sometimes go a bit deeper than that. And I think, if medicine hasn't really changed in that regard, sometimes we have to change our philosophies and we have to change our mindset to really have a bigger breakthrough, maybe a bigger impact. But I'm also encouraged on the other end, and I'm very privy of a lot of the research that's going on in biotech and health tech right now. We're on a very steep learning curve, and things I think are really exciting in the next decade right now. 5 to 10 years, there's some very interesting breakthroughs that are coming through, seemingly just on the cusp of these things. So what might have been sort of steady for a long time, I think we might see some really interesting changes in the near future.
Yeah, I think I love what you said. It's really about bringing these two worlds together. And I think at one point they were worlds apart, and now there's that integration, communication, and allyship that's taking place. And I think that's going to be a huge win, not only for practitioners from both sides of the equation, but really for the end user, which is the patient or the client in this case. And you're right. I think I'm pretty certain. I know you and I are both privy to things that are happening behind the scenes in healthcare, and I think it's very clear to me, and you're echoing that, is that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be some major breakthroughs that are going to be accessible and affordable. And so I always encourage people to keep all your organs if you can, because if you can live another 10 years, you'll live an extra 50. And so it's pretty cool to see what's happening. And it's fun to be, you know, innovating in our own way, like innovating our practices, innovating our messaging, helping people in new ways that they perhaps wouldn't have been able to be helped otherwise. I'm curious as to, you run the Dempster Clinic, which is a very successful practice. Again, you've helped many, many people with all kinds of different ailments. You also recently, and I know you've done a couple of these, you've done a gut health summit. And I'm sure you interviewed the top people around the world. I'd love for you to share, if you would, maybe what were some of your biggest takeaways when it came to gut health and restoring people's gut health?
Yeah, thanks, Sachin. Yeah, I hosted the Gut Reset Summit recently, where we interviewed 42 of the world's experts in gut health and with a wide variety of expertise and credentials. And there were some really interesting common denominators. And I've hosted summits years ago, but this is my most recent one. And so what was interesting, especially when it pertains to gut health, it's so powerful, and we've always known this, but the science is reiterating the gut-brain connection right now, and
Mm,
it's so powerful right now. And so we want to make sure that we're always addressing, what I mean by the gut-brain axis is, how does stress impact us? How does our environment impact us? How does our mindset impact us? These are all things that drive different biochemical and physiological events in our body. And I think we're just literally on the tip of the iceberg right now when it comes to this research, but it's compiling, and there's if we do a PubMed search for some of these topics, we're starting to see hundreds, if not thousands, of articles come up in these areas. So I'm always fascinated by, learning about how we can do some very simple things to have a profound outcome. Yes, we often, with some of our, more chronic cases and more complex cases, we have to do a more detailed workup and look at a number of different angles, some very, very specific things. And another big exciting part right now is, the expertise we're learning and developing in the microbiome, which is not a new term for anyone listening, but we are just scratching the surface there. And the more we can start to unpack that and learn this over the years, great research coming out of Harvard right now, some wonderful docs down there that I know you and I both have had the opportunity to meet and chat with. But those are two big areas right now, Sachin, from a gut perspective, which to me, if you can get your gut working better, not only from a digestive angle, that if I'm talking to people that have a gut problem, but more so if you want to get optimally healthy and optimally well, the gut is the foundation of so much. This is where we house approximately 80% of our immune system. This is where a significant amount of our neuroendocrinology is at least supported, if not already being created in there. Significant amount of where our nutrients are not only produced, some of which by our microbiome, but also where they're absorbed and brought in properly and effectively from our hopefully very healthy foods that we're eating and brought into our body so that our cells can be nourished and our tissues can be fed and provided properly. But that's, to me, why I get so passionate about the gut, is that there's so much we can do. And yes, digestive issues are serious. You've heard me speak of a couple very, critical cases earlier, but it's also going to help anyone who's dealing with, cardiometabolic issues, anyone who's dealing with neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's or dementias, and beyond, cancers included. So I think we can help a lot of people there when we start to get the foundation set and then build on that.
Yeah, I like to think of the gut as like the keystone system in the body. They're all the bricks in a bridge arch are equally important, but the keystone is what keeps it all together. And when you take that keystone out, the arch, kind of falls apart. The gut is connected to, as you mentioned, so many different systems, right? Our immune system, our microbiome, which has the majority of our DNA. So the majority of the DNA information in our body is housed in the microbiome. And I jokingly tell people, like, try to build a healthy brain without a healthy gut. It's actually impossible, because the gut produces the nutrients in many cases, absorbs the nutrients, and then delivers it through the bloodstream and through the vagus nerve signaling to the brain. So it's impossible to have a brain that's healthier than your gut. So it's such a important organ system to address, because the benefits of a healthy gut are pleomorphic, right? They translate to better skin health, better immune health, better brain health, better mental health, better cognition. All the things that we want can very easily be tied back to improving and optimizing gut health. And that brings me to, another question kind of leading in from that is, what's causing people's gut health, aside from diet, because, that's obvious, right? Hopefully to most people listening to this, but what are some other key factors that you feel are contributing to people's digestive systems not working as they used to?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors, but I'll highlight a few. Diet is obviously, as you say, a keystone, I would say, for that. But also, so is toxicity. And this is something that not too many of us can escape toxins right now. And hopefully we can reduce and minimize them. But these are things that, we could be experiencing in the air we breathe, the water we drink, obviously what we put on our skin and what we surround ourselves in right now. These are all things that we have to be looking at. So we hear of things such as heavy metals a lot, mercuries, aluminums, leads, cadmiums. These are things that are found unfortunately, in our drinking water. They're found in the air we breathe. They're found in some of our medications even. And so we have to really take a step back and say, okay, before we put something on, in, or around our body, is this healing us or is it harming us? So toxicity is a huge thing. I touched on another one earlier, and we are seeing more and more data supporting the impacts of chronic stress, and this is something that is on the rise. And as we are coming off the heels of one of modern history's biggest pandemics, we're still feeling the effects not only of that, but we have our daily stress and life stress to deal with right now, and this is something that has only been as we get into a more developed nation. I know you and I are very passionate about reducing stress, and you especially have some wonderful techniques to help people with breathing. But we are seeing the impacts of all sorts of life stressors, and that could be, gosh, it could be your commute to work. It could be the actual work itself, the workplace itself. It could be our relationships. It could be our finances. These are all things that are real life things that impact everybody. And there isn't anybody on this planet that can get out of stress scot-free. There are some that can buffer it better. But I think the more we learn on how we can handle those stressors and teach our children to do that and teach our grandchildren to do that, I think we're going to get into a healthier place, and it's going to impact a lot of people for the better.
I love that. I think a big thing for a lot of people is there's two parts to the equation, right? Or maybe even three. So, how much stress we can handle. So, how big is our stress bucket? How resilient are we? The second one is how can we process the stressors that are coming in, and certain nutrients can play a role in that, like as you obviously know, magnesium and vitamin C, which are major deficiencies for a lot of people. And then, of course, reducing uh, the water that's going in the bucket, reducing the amount of stress, because a lot of people want to have their cake and eat it too. And I think it's a combination of all three of those things, right? Really getting better at clearing the stress out, building up more resilience in the nervous system, more reserves, if you will, and then also reducing the amount of stress that they put themselves under, which is easier said than done. I get that. It's easy to talk about these things. And I know you also have some great strategies for your patients to help them through, in processing the stress, increasing resilience, and then techniques and hopefully guidance to reduce it as well.
And I love that you just mentioned that. You just reminded me a big area of this is also these chronic nutrient deficiencies we're experiencing. And it's a result not only of stress and toxicity in the processed foods and so forth. I haven't met a patient yet, and we do a thorough analysis on everybody's major nutrients and minor nutrients, and I haven't seen a perfect score yet. Now, people are often improving a lot through our care, but the nutrient deficiencies play a huge role. At the very least, one nutrient has 200 jobs in the body. At the very most, it's closer to 900. And so, we're really shooting ourselves in the feet if we don't optimize those nutrient deficiencies. And the earlier we do it, even when we don't feel sick, the sooner we get on that, the better the path we have ahead of us.
I love that, and I love your thoughts on this, because I have some thoughts on this, but I'd love to hear yours. You know, there's so much that we could be doing wrong and still live and survive and appear even to be healthy on the outside. Um, and the human body is just so resilient, right? So uh, it's amazing how we can not have these nutrients or be depleted, not have them, not obviously have them at zero, but be depleted, have all this stress, eat all this food. How does a body do it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how is that possible? Because if we treated our cars or our computers or our phones the way we treat our bodies, unknowingly, unconsciously, of course, they wouldn't work very long.
No, and
So how does a body manage? I'm curious of your thoughts.
and you put a smile on my face because I think you have mentioned this once. I think we do treat our cars better than we treat our bodies often. Well, it's interesting, and I kind of jokingly say sometimes to my patients, there is this. You remember George Burns? Remember he
Hmm.
smoked and he drank until he was 99. I think it was 99. Anyways, that's obviously not an ideal combination for health for most of us. But here's a guy that lived probably longer than most, and was doing probably the opposite of what most people should do. So how did this guy get away with it? Not something that I think we should all aspire to, but genes obviously play a role. And we can activate genes, we can deactivate them, we can't change them, we can't hand them back and get a new set of them. But there are people that sometimes are more resilient. Now, that's not something to take for granted. I think, the majority of us have to really be vigilant and responsible and really take this, we don't have to necessarily live like a monk and not have any fun in our life. Generally speaking, I adopt a rule in my practice. I say, look, I'm not here to help you strive for perfection. That's something that's going to drive you to insanity. But we are going to try and make enough change that we get progress. And so that's something that's just one of our mantras. One of my mantras is to make sure that we're not over stressing an already stressed out individual, because and I know you and I both know this, so many people get hung up. We'll use diet, for example. They get hung up on the absolute innuendos of every little bit of morsel of food that's going in their body. And that can drive them to some severe stress, eating disorders. And we just want to be very careful that we're creating a solution, not a problem for people too.
Yeah, so important. I think people can become obsessed, right? And that obsession can cause stress, which can, potentially cause a downward spiral for people. I know that I think we may have talked about this in a previous conversation, but what are some of the foundational things? Like, what are some of the extra dietary things? So, like non-dietary things that people can do. We talked about stress, but what are some other things that people can do to perhaps, if they're listening to this, immediately improve digestive function? Do you have some tips you can offer?
Yeah, there's a few things we're going to talk about. One is, I call this my eating hygiene big three, and these are three very, very simple things that everybody on this listening to this can apply effective now. And one of them is chew your food. This might sound really, really basic, but it's amazing to me, and I'm guilty at times too. But it's amazing to me how many of us do not chew our food properly. 33% of your digestion starts in your mouth, not down here. It starts up in here.
Mm.
And most of us, we are busy, we're rushed, we have stuff to do, we have deadlines and so forth. We got to pick up the kids, whatever it is. But we want to make sure that we are setting the stage for proper digestion. If you chew your food until it is mush, so think of what chewing a banana is like. That might be just a few bites. But think of what chewing maybe a piece of chicken or a piece of steak, what that entails. They're two very different kind of consistencies. We got to make sure that we're breaking it down into a mush. And so think of that, chew your food until it's a mush. You don't need to count necessarily, but just do it until you get that texture and that consistency. And then you are 33%, you're 1/3 ahead of the game. Okay. Number two, be chill when you eat. This comes back to the stress conversation. We have these two parts of our nervous system that are very important. One's called our fight or flight, and this is the one that keeps us out of danger, and we jump out of the way of a moving vehicle, hopefully, and very quickly respond in that way. But it's meant to be very short-lived, and it's meant to be almost pulsing, and with a nice recovery period afterwards. The other side of that nervous system is called the rest and digest. This is our autonomic nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system. And you can't be in both at the same time. You can't be in the sympathetic, the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, the rest and digest at the same time. But if you put your body into that rest and digest by doing 10 deep breaths before your meal, and again, Sachin, this is extremely basic breathing information coming from yourself, I'm sure, and we can discuss breathing in more detail. But doing those 10 deep breaths will actually start to bring down some of your stress hormones and reset the body and put you into a higher digestive state. So that's number two. Number three, don't drink when you eat. And that means any fluids. That could be water. That could be whatever other fluids you're having, but hopefully it's just water. When you eat, you want your body's digestive juices, its natural enzymes, its hydrochloric acid, its bile acids, and so forth. You want that to be a very concentrated solution. But think about when we're rushed and eating, usually at work, that's the only time that we've had in the day to drink our water. So we're knocking back 2 or 3 big glasses of water because we haven't had time to do that all day. What that's doing, it's diluting a lot of our enzyme potential. It's diluting a lot of our ability to break down those food particles into proper digestible sizes and forms so that we can extract the nutrients. And it also, therefore, it impairs our digestive system. Those are 3 super simple things that anyone listening on this call can do, and it will benefit their digestion.
I love that. I find that a lot of people wash back their food with fluids. So they're not chewing it, which means they're not producing enough saliva, which makes them feel like they need something to lubricate the food as it goes down into their stomach. So then they're washing it back with water or whatever that fluid is. Hopefully it's water, as you said. And oftentimes that's because they're in a rush and they're stressed out. So I remember I would have clients come to me and they would tell me, I've tried every diet. I've went to this person. I've tried these supplements and I'll just go back to the basics, just like you did. Are you chewing your food? No. Are you sitting when you're eating? No. Right. And are you drinking a lot of fluids? They're like, oh yeah, I drink and they're proudly telling me that they're drinking, lots of water with their meal. I'm like, well, that's what I would tell you to do. All three of those things are what I would tell you to do if I wanted to disrupt and destroy your digestive process, because those are the things that are foundational and essential. But it's like, this is the stuff our grandmother told us, and now it's like it skipped a generation and it's coming back to us, and we're bringing it back to first principles, right? Really going back to the basics. And I think in a very short period of time, if not even the very next meal, people can start to appreciate a pretty significant shift in their digestive function. I mean, people who have heartburn, like that's the first thing they need to start doing is cut out fluid intake with meals, make sure that they're in a rest and relaxed state and sitting, especially, and then chew their food. And it's like a miracle, but they may have been on medications or even enzyme supplementation for months or even years, and nobody's told them even the most basic things to do. So thank you for keeping it real, keeping it simple and practical as well. You said something earlier that I wanted to kind of bring back up again, and that is like how long it takes for people to get well. And you know the analogy I like to share with people is if you came across somebody and they're driving in the wrong direction for the last like 3 hours, and you point them in the right direction, they're immediately moving in the right direction. Now, it might take them a few hours to get back on track to where they need to be to get towards that destination that they're striving for. But for anyone who's listening to this, like once you start doing these things, you're immediately moving in the direction of your desire. And even though you may not feel well right away, in some cases you will, as you mentioned, um, stay the path, right? I think that's a good message for everyone who's tuned in today. A couple other things I want to highlight, John, is if somebody were to come to you, how would that experience, like walk me through that experience? So let's say I come across your website, I watch this interview, I'm like, I got to see Dr. John. What would that process look like? And walk me through that experience.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they come to see us, they've already been working with other doctors. Some people, this is a new approach for them and they're starting fresh, but a lot of people have ended up at our clinic because they're still trying to get some answers. So what we do and what I really want to do with every patient is take as deep a dive as I can to learn about them. And so even before we meet a new patient, we have them fill out a very, very comprehensive form. In fact, we caution them. It takes them 2 to 3 hours to fill out their intake form. This is our onboarding questionnaire. And this is something that I read and review even before I meet my patient for the first time, so that when we sit down in our first appointment, which is approximately an hour long, so we get a lot of time together, we sit down together and I've already prepared a number of talking points and I already have a number of ideas of where we need to go in that first appointment. But I do caution my patients, the first appointment isn't about treating everything all at once. It's about starting to now gather some clues. And I really liked your analogy a moment ago about driving and on a road, because I use an analogy as well. I say, we're going to start to create a GPS for you. We're going to try and find a way that helps you navigate some of the, things you might be able to get. If I told you to drive to Alaska today, you might be able to figure that out. But you're probably going to make some wrong turns, and we're probably going to, go down one road, as you say, the wrong way and come back and get there maybe a lot longer than it needed to take, and probably a lot more without spending a lot more resources and time and effort to do that. So what I really want to do with my patients is to help them be as precision based as we can. And so oftentimes in our first appointment, we're not just rolling out a magic treatment plan for them. We are starting to discuss, all right, we need to get some information from your body now. We have some information from your brain, which is very helpful, and it gives me an idea. Now we need to start to see what I call blind spots, things that both the patient and myself can't see on the surface. And sometimes these are going to be where we do some detailed lab testing with our patients. And that could be exploring, as I mentioned earlier, nutrient deficiencies, or that could be exploring how your body's responding to food. Some of the way we react to foods is not like an immediate allergy. It can be days later. And so that's sometimes very tricky to understand what foods are harming and what foods are healing beyond just like not eating processed foods, which we often know that will be a big help to people. We start talking about, okay, how's your hormones? How are they functioning? What are they up to? We've talked a lot about the gut earlier, and this is something that we have a huge amount of interest in. We want to understand those processes. Do we have enough of the right bacteria in there? Are we maybe dealing with too much of the wrong bacteria or parasites or yeast or other types of microbes like viruses? So we have a lot of tools at our fingertips that we start to hand pick, and we create a program based on the data that we start to gather from our patients from their samples. And so, the next step is when we sit down on our second appointment, we have that data in front of us. And we sit down together and we go through it all. And then at that point, that's when we're really starting to put together a proper treatment plan. And it really does depend on the patient's goals. That is our number one goal, is to achieve our patient's goals. We're not there to achieve anyone's goals other than their goals, but we are there to also help educate them and show them the best way to get them. And so that's our initial process.
I love that. It's so thorough and a nice framework to work with clients. Now, one of the other projects you've been working on, you're always innovating, which I love. And in addition to the Gut Reset Summit, you also run the Healthy Gut Institute. So I'd love for you to unpack a little bit more about the impetus to start the Healthy Gut Institute, and what who's the ideal client to engage and go through that process with you.
Yeah, so this was an idea that I had a few years ago, where I realized that my meetings with my patients, there's a lot of information that we throw at them. And you and I, this is stuff we talk about all day long. We might not need to dwell too much on the conversation of microbiome. We just might be like, okay, but there's a lot to unpack there. And even on this call, there's probably a lot of questions that people might have. And so what I really want to do is create a back end resource for people who are dealing, and this one is specifically for people who have gut issues, specifically IBS or IBD. And IBD is inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or colitis, and IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. And these are, especially IBS, there's a significant populace dealing with this right now, and many of them don't even realize they have it. They just think that it's normal to have 8 loose bowel movements a day, or to be gassy and bloated all day, or to have abdominal pain after a meal. That is not normal. And so what I really wanted to do is create a very efficient tool to help people get those resources to understand why these things might be happening, and give them some ideas as to how they can go about correcting them. So we unpack it's 6 modules long, and it's very easy to consume, but it's very in depth, and it gives patients a lot of and clients a lot of information there that they have at their fingertips forever. We have a lot of video assets and downloadable assets, shopping lists and meal plans and so forth that can give them an idea of where to begin. Now, of course, that is not going to bring in the personalization necessarily, but it is a foundation. And I think oftentimes we can get a lot of success by creating these foundational programs for people. And so that's one of our main sort of foundational program offerings we have right now.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people to realize is that it's going back to that foundation, because even if they were to come in and see you, you're still going to recommend the foundation, right? So this is probably the 80-20 Pareto principle, where these are the things that they can do that are going to get them 80% there. And so then when they do come in and see you in the office and get the testing done and go a little bit deeper into getting to the root cause, you're not having to wait until they're doing the basics to really see the benefits of the work that they're going to do with you. So it's a great place for a lot of people to start, and a great place for you to be able to share your knowledge. And of course, if you had to like go over this with them in an in-person consultation, they might forget some of it, or they may have a hard time going back home and explaining it to their spouse or their loved ones as to why they're making some of these changes. And when they can't explain it, they either don't, or they don't get the support that they need in order to facilitate those changes and make them part of their new lifestyle. So it's great that you've put this resource together, especially having interviewed dozens and dozens of the leading health experts in the world. It's a great place to concentrate that knowledge and make it available to people for an affordable price. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no, thank you for mentioning it. That's something that I do think is so key for many of us. And something you just said, Sachin, was important. There are many people out there that don't have that support, whether it's in the home, whether it be spouse, parents, siblings, whatever it might be. This is an obstacle. This is a real obstacle sometimes when the patient that I'm working with is trying to eat clean, but they're looking beside them and somebody's having something that's completely the antithesis of what we're trying to do. So this is the reality, right? Like this is how we help our patients navigate reality, and we really try to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, so good. So I want to ask some personal questions, so people listening can get to know you a little bit better. What are some of your favorite books that you've read?
I love this question. Well, something you might not even know about me, Sachin. This will again tell you where I'm heading with my book selection here. I used to be a whitewater canoe guide in the Arctic, and I did this I've been doing Arctic canoe trips up in rivers up there since I was 14. And then
Wow.
I became a guide when I was 16, and it got me through school and so forth. And to the point where I continued doing it even when I was practicing, not as a professional guide, but going on a trip with a select group of canoe trippers. And I've done 22 Arctic canoe trips up there. And for me, my another passion of mine beyond healthcare is Canada's North. And I've really taken to understanding, the finding of the Arctic Passage and things like this. So I am infatuated with Sir John Franklin. I don't know if you're familiar with who that is, but he was one of our original explorers that came from Britain, and he tried to find the Arctic Passage. And he had, fortunately, many successful trips, and then unfortunately a very terrible demise at the end. But so there's been some wonderful books, and I'm constantly consuming any sort of book that is on the Franklin expedition. So
Hmm.
a number of them there, but that's just one. You just made me think of that. But a book that is maybe a little bit more pertinent to healthcare that I thought it was really well done was Outlive by Peter Attia. And I'm not sure if you've read that, but again, there's somebody who's speaking the language that you and I appreciate, which is taking, call it ancient wisdom or logic and, just things that are common sense, but now bridging the technology and bridging the science and really backing it up with evidence and saying, hey, this is not some speculative comment. This is something that is backed by data. And if anyone's interested in improving, not necessarily, I don't believe there's, this magic fountain of youth, but giving your body a chance to improve your health span and, optimally hit a higher longevity point, that's a wonderful book as well.
Yeah, I love that. I was I have the audio version of it and been listening to it while working out. It's hard. It's like hard to.
It's
It's
this thick. The book
yeah.
is this thick.
And it's all evidence based. And Peter Attia is actually from Toronto, which is kind of cool. I think he went to York University, if I'm not mistaken, so not too far from where both of us grew up. And well, I guess you grew up in North, but now that we live in
Toronto's home
Toronto,
now. Yeah.
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 So Toronto's home for me as well. Well, Mississauga, so just outside. So it's kind of great to see like a hometown boy like spreading the message and getting the word out there and teaching people how to live a long and healthy life. I've got a curiosity that came up as you were answering that. Uh, and that is, what does a gut health expert like yourself eat first thing in the morning or consume first thing in the morning? Maybe you don't eat anything, but I'm curious, what's the first thing that goes into your mouth every day?
My water and my probiotics. That's where it starts. Now, that's not my meal, but that's what I do. That's usually what I do when I first wake up. I put that down, make sure that we're hydrating, make sure we're flushing. And I do, there's many, many different types of probiotics, and today's not the day to get into that. But, there are certain strains that really help me optimize my health and well-being. So I flush that out first. And yeah, my breakfast, I try to, and this is what I preach, is I try to say, get some variety. So I don't just get stuck on just one thing, but I do still like a good pasture-raised organic egg, some form of a whole egg omelet, not egg whites, but a whole egg omelet. And I'll put all sorts of other vegetables and things in there as well, and other proteins sometimes. But I do well with a nice protein-rich breakfast. And again, we have to sometimes meet people with different biochemistries where they're at, but that's what I do, and that's what I thrive on.
I love that. I recently read an article yesterday. I was actually reading about this, the effects of gut bacteria on our appetite and how they affect certain probiotics can affect GLP-1, which is, Ozempic and other popular drugs that are on the market right now to help people with essentially weight loss through appetite suppression and cell signaling that reduces, metabolic inflammation as well as insulin resistance. So it's kind of cool to see that things that we've been preaching for many, many years is now being backed by scientific research. And the specific bacteria that they were referring to is Akkermansia. And I know that for people listening to this, they may not necessarily know what that means, but Akkermansia is a type of bacteria that feeds off of the mucosal lining of our gut and helps protect it and does a whole bunch of other things. And I found it quite interesting because one of the best ways to cultivate Akkermansia is prebiotics. So making sure you're eating foods that feed the healthy keystone bacteria and also fasting. So, in every culture, in every religion, fasting is a big component. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts on fasting are.
I think fasting has got a heap of science behind it, and I think it is very, very important to do. I do it on occasion. Personally, my physiology is I actually do need to have some protein and some fat sooner than some people that can do the full, proper 18-hour fast. But I've seen so many patients do very, very well. I'm a big believer in it, but I'm also a believer of making sure what we prescribe or discuss with our patients is the right fit for them.
Mm.
And so I do think it's incredibly powerful when done properly. And all that means is like, make sure that you are breaking that fast properly, make sure that you are listening to your body. Some people, they might be able to go that full, whether it's full or not, but 18 hours to that 6 ratio, that might be easy for some, and it might be a real strain from others that they have to work their way up to that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Another controversial topic these days is, of course, diet's always controversial, but one of the things that's gaining popularity is the carnivore diet. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, I do, and Dr. Paul Saladino is a big. He's coined himself the carnivore MD. You're probably familiar with him,
Mm-hmm.
but I think he's done some great research in this space. And yes, it is controversial. I think we have to be very careful because somebody could eat hot dog and bologna and technically be on a carnivore diet. Does that mean is that a good thing for somebody to do over and over and over again? Probably not. But in the other sense, there are some people that tend to do very well being vegan. And I personally am not one of those people, but and there's no judgment on any sort of vegan versus carnivore based approach here. But I still think we have to listen to our bodies and meet people where they're at. I see the merits, and I've seen some incredible transformations with people that have moved into more of a carnivore eating plan.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible transformations. People that were eating healthy foods, like eating those, wonderful vegetable spreads. Unfortunately, their biochemistry, it wasn't working for them. They either had a reaction to lectins and some other issues, oxalates and so forth. But that has changed some people's lives for the better, but it is not for everyone. And, I think there is it is very controversial because there is some staunch advocates for veganism out there. And I do see some people drastically improve with veganism. So I'm sorry if I sound like I'm in the middle here, but I certainly, I really do believe that we have to make sure that we're listening to what our body's telling us. And sometimes we can listen by looking at labs and so forth a bit further, but the logic in terms of how our body's not only feeling at that moment, but also recovering and doing weeks, days, months later, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice, right? Because all of us have different microbiomes, which means that if you and I ate the exact same food, our genetics are different, our microbiomes are different, and we've really got to pay attention to what resonates with our bodies. And I think spiritually, what resonates with us also may come into play. Philosophically, what resonates us with us might also come into play. So there's so many. Diet is such a explosive topic, right? It's like walking on landmines sometimes, or in a field of landmines, because you just never know who's going to be offended by what you say or share. But I love what you said. It's like it's really bio individualized for the person, and I think that's the best advice that we could give to anybody is pay attention. Your body never lies, as one of my mentors says, and pay attention to what it's trying to tell you.
That's it. Absolutely.
All right, John, I really enjoyed our time today. I know that each of the topics that we discussed could be an hour long interview and topic of discussion. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think people should know about you or your practice or your mission?
I think you've asked all wonderful questions, Sachin. Thank you. You really hit on some key topics. One thing I think I'll leave people with is, it's easy to get overwhelmed when you listen to whether, it's health podcasts or reading a book or even just reading a blog post. Oh my gosh, how can I ever make all these necessary changes to get to where these people want us to get to? I would leave it with this. It's not about perfection, as I said earlier, but it's about progress. And if you can just focus on doing something slightly better each day, each week, you're going to have this massive, massive compounded, I call it health interest. It's going to start to accrue. And I mean, if you had deposited $100 100 years ago, you would have an insane amount of money in your bank account right now from compounded interest. So not that we need to worry about that time frame, but even, something that you start today is going to have a tremendous impact down the road. So don't get crippled. Don't suffer from analysis paralysis. Just dive in, start today. It's imperfect action, but make progress. That's all you need to do, and you will see some changes.
I love that. I love that. And I think we have to be kind and gentle to ourselves in order for us to be able to stick through things because, of course, we can control what we eat, but we don't want that to be a source of failure and frustration for us. So, I certainly have non-negotiables, certain things with my nutrition. I haven't had gluten in over 13 years now, and there's no conditions under which I would. So I know that but there's other things that I eat that are negotiable, right, under certain circumstances. So I think we can pick our battles, but don't make them too difficult to the point where we just kind of fall off the wagon and totally give up. Stay consistent. I think that's the best advice that we could offer people, and be kind and gentle to yourself.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it any better.
Awesome. So where can people learn more? Where can they connect with you? Where can they schedule? I'd love to make sure we direct people to take decisive action.
Well, they can find us online at www.thedempsterclinic.com. And you'll be able to see that we have a lot of available resources there for you. Many are free that you can access right away. You can access our Healthy Gut Institute from the same website. And for anyone who is interested and this is new to them and they're not quite sure if it's the right fit, we do offer a complimentary discovery call that we welcome anybody to take full advantage of. And you can book that just by contacting us again through our clinic website.
Amazing. Thank you, my friend. Keep doing the amazing work. So looking forward to walking this path with you and ensuring that we serve and help as many people as we can. Much love, much gratitude, and much appreciation for the work that you're doing.
And thanks to you, Sachin. Right back at you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Have an amazing rest of your day.